Picture a warehouse in Birmingham, England, February 1945. The building stretches the length of 3 football fields, and inside, stacked floor to ceiling like monuments to chaos, are mountains of letters. 17 million pieces of mail, some dated 1943, others from 1944. Soldiers' love letters, death notifications, Christmas packages that never arrived, birthday wishes 2 years late. The British and American postal services have given up. Military command has admitted defeat. This backlog is considered impossible to clear. And then, on a freezing February morning, 855 black women march through those warehouse doors. I'm about to tell you the story of the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, the only all-black women's Army Corps unit to serve overseas during World War II. What they accomplished in the next 90 days defies every assumption about what was possible. But here's what makes this story truly disturbing. While they worked around the clock to connect white soldiers with their families, they themselves were segregated, demeaned, and erased from history. This is the story of the 6888, and it's time you knew their names. Let me take you back to understand exactly what these women were walking into. By early 1945, the European theatre postal system had completely collapsed. Think about what that actually means. You're a soldier in a foxhole in France. You haven't heard from your wife in 8 months. You don't know if your child was born. You don't know if your mother survived her surgery. You don't know if your girlfriend got engaged to someone else. That uncertainty, that psychological torture, was destroying morale faster than German bullets. The numbers tell the story. 17 million pieces of mail. Warehouses in Birmingham, London, and Rouen, France, stacked with undeliverable letters. The system was designed for maybe 2 to 3 million letters per month. It was receiving 8 million. But here's what nobody talks about. This wasn't just incompetence. The military postal system was staffed almost entirely by white men who were overwhelmed, undertrained, and in many cases simply didn't care anymore. They'd been trying for 2 years. They'd failed. Enter Major Charity Adams. Charity Adams Early was 26 years old when she took command of the 6888. Let me paint you a picture of who she was. 5'4", soft-spoken, a math teacher from South Carolina who'd graduated from Wilberforce University. The kind of woman who, in 1945 America, wasn't supposed to command anything. But she had something the Army needed desperately. She got results. The Army's proposal was simple and insulting. They told Major Adams, "Clear this backlog in 6 months, and we'll consider it a success." 6 months for 17 million pieces of mail meant processing about 95,000 letters per day, with 855 women working in damaged, rat-infested, unheated warehouses in a foreign country during blackout conditions because German bombers still threatened England. Major Adams looked at those numbers. She looked at her women, and she said, "We'll do it in 90 days. Can you imagine the laughter, the condescension? Here's what you need to understand about the environment they were entering. These women were segregated. They couldn't eat in the same mess halls as white troops. They faced constant racial slurs. British civilians, who often treated them better than American soldiers did, were baffled by American racism. And yet, Major Adams promised the impossible. What happens next is a masterclass in leadership, mathematics, and sheer determination. Major Adams understood something fundamental. This wasn't a mail problem. This was a data problem. The challenge wasn't just sorting letters. It was that soldiers moved constantly. Units were reassigned. Men were wounded, transferred, killed. A letter addressed to Private James Smith, 101st Airborne, might arrive when Private Smith was now in a hospital in Paris, or dead on Omaha Beach, or reassigned to the Pacific. There were 7 million American soldiers in Europe, each one moving through a constantly shifting landscape of war. So Major Adams designed a system, and I need you to understand how revolutionary this was. She divided her 855 women into 3 8-hour shifts, working around the clock. But it wasn't just sorting. She created a card catalog system. Think of it as a 1945 search engine that tracked every soldier's movement, every unit transfer, every casualty report. Each woman was trained in a specific role. Sorters who categorized by theater, European, Pacific, North Africa. Trackers who followed unit movements using military reports, readdressers who corrected outdated information, clerks who maintained the card catalog, couriers who delivered the final sorted mail to distribution points. They worked in freezing warehouses with broken windows. During blackouts, they worked by candlelight. When the electricity failed, which was often, they kept going. But here's the detail that haunts me. They opened every single letter that couldn't be delivered. Think about that. These women read death notifications meant for mothers who would never receive them. Love letters from soldiers who were already dead. Final words that would never reach their intended recipients. One member of the 6,888th, Lena Derricott Bell King, later recalled, "We cried sometimes, reading those letters. A wife writing to tell her husband about their baby being born, and we knew he'd been killed 2 weeks before she wrote it. We cried, then we kept working." The motto of the 6,888th became, "No mail, low morale." They understood something command didn't. Mail wasn't just paper. It was the only thread connecting soldiers to their humanity. Every letter they delivered was a reminder that someone loved them, waited for them, needed them to come home. So they created what they called the speed system. Letters arrived in bulk sacks, thousands at a time. The first shift opened every sack, did preliminary sorting by last name. Second shift refined by first name and unit. Third shift did final tracking and readdressing. The goal, process 195,000 pieces of mail per shift, per 8 hours. That's 406 letters per minute. That's almost 7 letters per second, continuously, for 8 hours straight. And they did it. Within the first week, they were outpacing projections. Within 2 weeks, they'd cleared 2 million pieces of mail. By week 3, the British postal officials were calling them miracle workers. But here's what nobody was talking about. While these black women worked triple shifts to deliver mail to white soldiers, those same white soldiers were often the ones hurling racial slurs at them. I need to pause here to explain exactly what these women faced every single day. Imagine this. You're working 3 8-hour shifts, 24 hours of continuous operation to support the war effort. You're processing more mail than any unit in military history. You're succeeding where everyone said you'd fail. And then you try to eat dinner. The 6,888th was housed in separate inferior barracks. They ate in segregated mess halls, often after white soldiers had already been served, meaning they got the cold leftover food. They couldn't use the same recreation facilities. When they went into town in Birmingham or London, white American MPs would sometimes harass them, telling British establishments not to serve coloured troops. Here's the twisted irony. British civilians often couldn't understand American racial segregation. To them, these women were American soldiers, heroes. They'd invite them to dances, to dinners, to church services. And then white American soldiers would show up and demand the British enforce American segregation. There's a documented incident in Birmingham where white American soldiers tried to force the 6,888 out of a social club. Major Adams confronted the commanding officer, a white colonel, who threatened to arrest her entire battalion. Her response has become legendary. She said, "Over my dead body, sir. These women have done more for this war effort in 3 weeks than your men did in 3 years. You'll have to go through me first." The colonel backed down. But think about what that moment reveals. A black woman officer having to physically stand between her troops and white American military police in 1945, in the middle of a war against fascism. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. Private Mary Ragland, one of the 6,888th members, later wrote in her diary, We're sorting love letters from white soldiers to their white wives, reading about their dreams for after the war. And those same soldiers won't eat at the same table as us, won't look us in the eye, call us things I won't repeat. Another member, Gladys Schuster Carter, remembered, "We were good enough to fix their male problems. We weren't good enough to be treated like human beings." The emotional toll was crushing. These women were performing at levels that should have earned them commendations, medals, recognition. Instead, they got separate water fountains. But here's what command didn't count on. Oppression can forge solidarity. The 6,888th became a family. They protected each other. When one woman got sick, and many did, working in those freezing warehouses, others covered her shift. When racial incidents occurred, they stood together. When exhaustion threatened to break them, they sang. They had their own songs, their own chants. While working those 24-hour operations, you could hear them singing Negro spirituals, work songs, jazz numbers. The music kept them going when everything else said to quit. Major Adams later said, "They tried to break us with segregation. Instead, it made us unbreakable." And they were going to need that strength, because what came next would test them beyond anything they'd faced. By day 30, they'd cleared 5 million letters. By day 60, they'd cleared 11 million. Command was stunned. The British postal officials called it impossible. Generals who'd written off the mail backlog as unsolvable started paying attention. And the women of the 6,888th just kept working. Here's what made their system revolutionary. They weren't just faster, they were more accurate. The previous system, run by white male soldiers, had a misdelivery rate of about 12%. 1 in 8 letters went to the wrong person or got lost entirely. The 6,888th got that down to 2%. Think about what that means mathematically. They were processing 3 times more mail, 6 times faster, with 6 times better accuracy. This wasn't just hard work. This was operational genius. They developed innovations that the military would adopt permanently. The tracking card system that became the basis for modern military postal operations. 3-shift, 24-hour processing that maximized efficiency. Cross-referencing casualty reports with mail delivery to reroute letters from KIA soldiers. A coding system for common names, all those James Smiths and John Johnsons, that used unit numbers and service dates. Major Adams was essentially inventing database management in 1945, using paper cards and human memory. But here's the detail that makes me pause. These women were doing all of this while dealing with the content of the letters themselves. Remember, they had to open undeliverable mail. That meant reading condolence letters, death notifications, Dear John letters. Letters from soldiers who were writing home one last time before a major offensive. Private Dolores Brown later recalled finding a package that had been in the warehouse for 18 months. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf and a letter from a mother to her son. The letter talked about her garden, her church, her hope that he'd be home for Christmas, 1943. They tracked the soldier. He'd died on D-Day, June 6, 1944. Dolores had to mark that package, return to sender, deceased. She had to imagine that mother receiving her own scarf back, learning her son had been dead for months. "We cried that day," Dolores said. "Then we worked harder. Because maybe the next letter we processed would reach someone in time. Maybe we could give someone a reason to keep fighting." On day 89, with 1 day to spare, they processed the final piece of mail. 17 million letters, 90 days, 0 days over deadline. It remains the fastest, most efficient mail processing operation in military history. Command's response? Silence. No medals, no commendations, no front-page stories. The 6,888th was immediately reassigned to Rouen, France, to clear another backlog, then to Paris. Always the impossible jobs, always succeeding, never recognized. But the soldiers, the ones who finally got their letters. They knew. Word spread through the ranks that the 6888 were the ones making it happen. Black women soldiers who could do in weeks what white male units couldn't do in years. The cognitive dissonance must have been crushing for some. The gratitude had to coexist with the prejudice. Here's where this story takes its darkest turn. After the war ended, the 6888th returned to the United States in February 1946. There were no parades, no ticker tape celebrations, no front-page photos in Life magazine. They were processed out of the military with barely a mention in official records. The 6888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, the only all-black WAC unit to serve overseas, the unit that achieved the impossible, was reduced to a footnote. For decades, their story was essentially unknown. Why? Let me be direct about this. America in 1946 wasn't ready to celebrate black women as heroes. The dominant narrative of World War II was white male soldiers storming beaches, flying bombers, liberating concentration camps. There was no space in that story for 855 black women who won the war with postal efficiency. The official military histories barely mentioned them. When they did, it was usually a single line. Postal operations improved significantly in 1945. No mention of who made that improvement possible. The women themselves returned to an America that was still deeply segregated. Many couldn't find jobs despite their proven skills. Some were explicitly told that employers weren't hiring colored girls. Others faced the same discrimination they'd left behind, only now they had military service records that nobody cared about. Major Charity Adams Early wrote a memoir in 1989 called One Woman's Army. It's a powerful, detailed account of the 6888th. It was published by a small academic press, barely reviewed, largely forgotten. Can you imagine? The woman who commanded one of the most successful military operations of World War II had to fight just to get her story published, and even then, almost nobody read it. For nearly 75 years, the 6888 existed in historical purgatory. A few academic papers, occasional mentions in Black history publications. But mainstream American consciousness, nothing. This is what erasure looks like. Not dramatic book burning or banned histories. Just silence. The slow suffocation of a story through indifference. In 2019, 74 years after their achievement, a monument to the 6888th was finally dedicated at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. By then, most of the women were gone. Of the 855 members, fewer than 10 were still alive to see it. Lena Derricott Bell King attended the ceremony. She was 97 years old. She said, "I never thought I'd see this day. Most of my sisters didn't." In 2022, Congress passed legislation awarding the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor, to the 6888th Central Postal Directory Battalion. 3 members were still alive to receive it. 3 out of 855. President Biden presented the medal in a White House ceremony. He said, "They worked around the clock, cleared 17 million pieces of mail in 3 months, and connected families to their soldiers during the darkest days of war, and America forgot them." That last sentence is the one that matters. America forgot them. Not by accident, not through some innocent oversight. America forgot them because their story complicated a narrative we wanted to tell about ourselves. A narrative where white heroes saved the world and everyone else was a supporting character at best. The women of the 6888th deserved better. They deserved parades in 1946. They deserved medals and recognition and front-page stories. They deserved to be remembered not as a footnote, but as the extraordinary pioneers they were. Instead, they got silence for 75 years. And here's what haunts me. How many other stories like this exist? How many other units, Other heroes, other impossible achievements have been erased because they didn't fit the narrative. The story of the 6,888th is about more than male. It's about excellence under oppression, achievement despite erasure, women who did the impossible while being told they were impossible. It's about 855 black women who proved that talent, intelligence, and determination had nothing to do with skin color and everything to do with character. And it's about how America repaid them, with segregation, silence, and systematic forgetting. We tell ourselves we've changed, that we're better now, that we see merit wherever it exists. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The same pattern persists. Excellence from marginalized groups is still often unrecognized, uncelebrated, conveniently forgotten. The names that make it into history books are still disproportionately white, male, privileged. The 6,888th teaches us that history isn't just what happened, it's what we choose to remember, and what we choose to forget reveals everything about who we are. Major Charity Adams Early died in 2002. Her obituary in the New York Times was 400 words long. It mentioned her military service in passing. Lena King died in 2021, at 99. The last surviving member will likely die within the next few years. Soon, there will be no living memory of the 6,888. Just monuments erected too late, medals awarded to ghosts, and stories like this one, trying desperately to preserve what should never have been forgotten. Remember their names. Remember what they did. And ask yourself, whose stories are we erasing right now?